Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this snowy Thursday morning. We're really excited to have you all here. My name is Dan Mitzner. I'm the Director of Political Affairs for Teach NYS. We're very pleased to have Senator Joseph Addabbo with us and Assemblymember Andrew Hevesi to discuss a critical piece of legislation for non-public schools that they have championed. And this is part of a broader conversation regarding school closures during the pandemic. As Governor Cuomo and several other governors in the region have stated, in-person instruction is paramount really for the education process and for the well-being of students. And so, and as the science has developed, it has shown that, schools are not the vector for transmission that was once believed. And the state has responded and evolved, thankfully, with the data and the science to show that schools should remain open. And that's something that Teach NYS worked very hard with Governor Cuomo and the legislature to make sure that there was a way for non-public schools and others to remain open, irrespective sort of the zone that they find themselves in. And so we worked really, and that includes the surveillance testing requirements that were put in place. As long as transmission, as the rates of positivity in schools remain low, schools can remain open as long as they're doing the surveillance testing. But of course, surveillance testing, along with everything, comes with a price tag. And that's a significant burden on our schools, which are already faced with tremendous expenses borne out of the pandemic and the economic situation in the state. And so this legislation comes very welcome to our community. It is a very important piece, and we're very happy to have such great allies and friends in the legislature, such as Assemblymember Hevesi and Senator Addabbo. And so with that, what I wanted to do was introduce Eli Schilowitz, who is the president of the board of Har Torah, Yeshiva Har Torah, and he's a wonderful activist and lay leader for Teach NYS. And we wanted to start the conversation off that way. So with that, Eli, please take it away, and we're looking forward to a great conversation.
Thanks very much, Daniel. I think I'll start with some introductions. I'll introduce Senator Addabbo and Assemblymember Hevesi. Senator Addabbo was elected to the New York State Senate in 2008 after serving 7 years in the New York City Council. He's a lifelong resident of Queens, represents the 15th Senatorial District, which encompasses the communities of in Holer and Part, Broad Channel, Elmhurst, Forest Hills, Glendale, Hamilton Beach, Howard Beach, Kew Gardens, Kew Garden Hills, Maspeth, Middle Village, Ozone Park, Rego Park, Richmond Hill, Ridgewood, South Ozone Park, Woodhaven, Woodside, and a whole bunch of the Rockaways. He's a member of the Senate Committee on Education, Aging, Civil Service and Pensions, Domestic Animal Welfare, State Native American Relations and Veterans, Homeland Security, and Military Affairs Committees, and he chairs the Committee on Racing, Gaming, and Wagering. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Assemblymember Hevesi was first elected to serve the residents of the 28th District in the New York State Assembly in May 2005. He's a lifelong resident of the area as well. He represents the constituents of Forest Hills, Rego Park, Ridgewood, Richmond Hill, Middle Village, Glendale, and Kew Gardens. In February 2015, he was named chairman of the Assembly Social Services Committee, which is responsible for providing oversight of programs administered by the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, OTDA, and analyzing the state's multi-billion-dollar funding allotment for social services each fiscal year. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
So I will, I'm just going to ask some questions, and I'll let the two of you share your knowledge on it. I think I'll say, why doesn't Senator Addabbo start first, and then both of you can jump in, and then we'll alternate on questions like that just for Zoom order. Right. Can you start off by introducing what the bill is and what it would do?
Sure. Thanks. And I do want to thank Teach NYS for allowing us to be here today, and wish everyone a good holiday. The bill is a really good bill that addresses a major issue for today. And I want to thank my good friend and colleague, Andy Hevesi, for contacting our office. Actually, he started this off, and he contacted our office, and we proudly carried it in the Senate. The bill is actually going to address an issue that just the question of parity or equality, or equity. The bottom line is when the government mandates that schools are to test their students for COVID in an effort to ensure students, teachers' safety. The bottom line is when the government mandates something, well, they should pay. They shouldn't have the burden put on private schools. So actually, this bill is all about equity and parity. For the roughly 250,000 private school students in the city, the bottom line is the cost of each kit, roughly ranges from $20 and up, could be costly for a school that has already paid out. Again, a lot of money for cost-saving measures due to COVID. Actually, when Andy's office had called me about this, I was thinking about, I recently visited the yeshivas down in Rockaway and saw that the measures that they took, the $500,000 that they spent on an individual school on plexiglass and scanners and filters and, every other measure to take to protect their students, but they weren't reimbursed of those costs. That's unfair. So the idea is, I really like this bill a lot in effort that, again, is just about parity and equity. So I look forward to working with my good friend Andy Hevesi and seeing if we can advance it as soon as possible.
Is that for me, Eli? You want me to jump in?
Yeah, if you have anything to add, please do.
I do. First, thank you to both you and Dan for allowing me to be here with Teach New York State, and thank you for all of the work that you guys do. And definitely thanks to Senator Joe Addabbo, my good friend. I do have to notice that this may be the first time that I have dressed more formally than Senator Addabbo. Usually in the Senate, he has a tie on, and it makes me look bad because I'm at people's house. But I am in a jacket, sir. I want that recorded for the record. So the impetus for this bill was very simple. Post-COVID, we started to hear from some of our parents and teachers, and we talked to the administrators of some local non-public schools. And one of the issues that they raised is that in order to comply with the governor's mandated testing requirements, which I completely support, they're going to be out thousands of dollars a month. And that means those thousands of dollars that they're going to have to privately raise are going to come out of the educations of the kids we represent. And that's just not acceptable. So in an effort to ensure that there is equity and fairness, as the senator said, we decided that the state should reimburse. And we looked for a pattern of doing that. And there is a pattern in New York state law where private schools, non-public schools get reimbursed for state mandated services. This should absolutely be on the list. While everybody's in bad financial circumstances, you don't want this hitting our schools and affecting their education. So that was really the impetus of the bill. It's a simple bill. It's about fairness, and I think it will be a very good law when the senator and I get back in up to session in the coming new year.
I see we have some executive directors in attendance today. So I know they're going to want to know, how would the process actually work? How would the schools get reimbursed? And what would specifically be reimbursed? Anything on that you can add? Why don't we start with you? Why don't we start with you, Assemblymember?
Senator. No, Senator, go ahead, please. If you
No. Andy, go ahead. Your turn.
Okay. So the bill sets forth a requirement. It doesn't set forth specifics on how it's to be done. We just tell New York State it will be in law that these will be these costs associated with testing due to the COVID crisis only will be reimbursed by the state, and a state department will have to come up with a mechanism to do that. We leave it to them. We didn't want to micromanage, but we'll monitor it to make sure that the money's going where it needs to go.
Sure. Senator Addabbo, you want to add anything? Or
Andy is right. The bottom line is, it's not about micromanaging, but making it correctly. The commissioner of the State Department of Ed has the means and the wherewithal to do this, working with other government agencies. So we're confident that, again, it can be done, no question. The question is, how fast can they do it? And we'll make sure that, again, once implemented, it gets done right.
So touching on that then, and starting with you, Senator Addabbo, what is the timing process status for this bill going forward?
Well, unfortunately, we look at a calendar, we're running out of time for this year, whether we were to do a revenue package or any other kind of COVID-related legislation. So, as much as I'm an optimist, I'm also a realist. And so we are running out of time for this year. That being said, I don't want to wait to maybe, look at the budget. And this could be put in the budget because it does have a fiscal note to it. But the bottom line is that would be April. And so I think we need to do this, early part of January. And I'm sure working with the Assemblymember, we'll push this as soon as we get started. I believe January 5th is our first legislative day, and everything is virtual at this point. But nevertheless, when we return to work early January, this would be a priority for me, and I'm sure would be for my friend, Assemblymember Hevesi.
Absolutely. So just to piggyback off that, the senator is absolutely right. So number one, before the end of this year, even though the legislature might be convening to raise new revenue because we're in dire financial straits, this will not be on the agenda before January. When we get to session, I'm going to be looking, and I hope the senator, I believe he will, to be passing it legislatively as well. And we'll have a component of that legislation say pursuant to actions taken forth in the subsequent budget. And so at the latest, we can get that passed either legislatively or we can wait and try to insert it into the budget either way. This is not a huge amount of money for the state, but I do want to put that into context. The state is legitimately facing an $8 billion deficit this year. Plus, if you start looking at the out years, you're talking about a $60 or $65 billion deficit. So we're really struggling for money. But it's our job as legislators and the coalition of electeds that have already started signing on to the bill to make the case that this has to be one of the top priorities, because we know that everybody's hurting, but we certainly don't want money taken out of the educations of the kids we represent. So we're going to push pretty aggressively for it. I don't think it's a huge fiscal, so I don't think it'll be a monster lift, but you have to put it in the context of we're dealing with some hard financial times. I know everybody is, but I want to be fair and realistic about our chances here.
If the bill becomes law, would it go back for past expenses, or would it only be going forward?
It will be for any expense during the COVID crisis, which means that since the governor declared this emergency and has accrued emergency powers, which go back to March of this year through the end of his disaster response, which has not ended, and unfortunately it's not going to end for a couple of months. So the goal of the legislation is to catch every time, whether it happened already or going forward, that the state required testing of our non-public schools should be caught under this bill. If it's not, we'll find out and we'll adjust to make sure that it is, but I believe that it is with the current way it's drafted.
Daniel, do you want to, I know we have some questions before we move on to more general funding topics. Do you want to get the questions from the chat?
I think we can leave the questions to the end, and
Okay.
we'll ask them all at once. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. So then I think we're going to move on to like a broader topic here, which is, it seems like there's a second major federal relief package coming. What is it that you would like to see in that package from an educational perspective? And what do you think is realistic?
Realistic is a great word because of the federal stimulus. I've said it that it's basically inconsistent and unreliable. I mean, we've been waiting since June, for our second stimulus, and it has not come here. Now we're in December, so certainly we need the money, quickly, given, like Andy said, our budget deficit. And we look at prior funding. We look at the CARES Act back in March, April. A $3 trillion package from the federal government, which we are appreciative of. But of that $3 trillion, New York State, for its budget, only got $5 billion, which is a fraction of the $3 trillion. So the bottom line is, when we look and advocate for this funding from the federal government, we should be earmarking it for certain reasons. And certainly education should be a high priority. Reimbursement, of course, like I mentioned, some yeshivas spent over $500,000 on ensuring the safety of their teachers and administration, and of course the students, and they didn't get reimbursed. And the idea here is, reimbursement to me is critical because these schools are, working on a very thin budget themselves. We are facing, as we did in April when we did our budget, we are facing deep cuts into healthcare and education, the two largest portions of our state budget. And none of us want to go back to our constituency, especially during a pandemic, and talk about cuts to healthcare and education. So the federal stimulus really is going to be helpful in terms of warding off a lot of the proposed cuts to healthcare and especially education. And again, we should be working together with the governor's office and the Assembly and the Senate to figure out and to dictate where this money goes. Like I said, I think reimbursement and anything that directly affects the health of our students.
If I could piggyback off that, so the Senator's 100% right. Look, we're in a real serious financial trouble, and that's not just for the New York State. That's New York City. That's every locality, and that will manifest in the budgets that we create for our education for school districts coming up in the coming year. I want to say the following. It's going to sound political. It's not. I want to say this in a nonpartisan way. The fact that Washington has failed to deliver a second stimulus is a real problem and a real disgrace. While I'm hopeful that they're about to come up with a $900 billion package and will take anything that they can get, and there will be money to assist some of the things that we need, it falls far short of what's going to be required to fill these budget deficits. I know our houses have been talking about raising additional revenue, but we got to be careful about that. You don't want to raise revenue. So let me say it this way. So for taxes, I'm for raising taxes because the financial circumstances are so terrible, but you have to have smart taxes. If you tax people and you stop gaining revenue from those taxes, I'll give you an example. In the early 90s, we raised the hotel occupancy tax because we thought, hey, we're great to make a lot of money, until the hotel industry started to boycott us and we actually lost money. So you have to be very careful about where you're raising taxes to fill these gaps. But for months, we've been waiting on the federal government to deliver the HEROES Act, which started out in the neighborhood of $3 billion, which I would have supported. We're now down to $900 million. And the thing that's most disheartening for me is what they're cutting out at the federal level of the stimulus that we're about to get is the most important thing. The state and local government share of this should be in the stimulus bill is not being negotiated because Mitch McConnell and the Republicans aren't interested. They're also not negotiating something that the Senator McConnell wants as well. They put it off because it's too difficult a negotiation to get done by, I believe it's Friday. But the fact remains, by cutting out state and local reimbursement, you are now guaranteeing that New York State and every other state has a monster hole, and that we're going to have to start to manage cash. And managing cash means you're going to start looking at stuff to cut. And that's where it gets dangerous. So the senator and I have our work cut out for us to go back up to Albany and say, first, don't cut the things we care about. And second, New York State has a moral and financial responsibility to reimburse the schools in all of our districts that have been doing nothing but trying to service those kids and keep them safe and do the best that they can. So we have a big fight ahead of us, but I think we're gonna succeed in that fight.
Before, I think we're coming to a good juncture to get those questions, Dan, but before we do, one other question I had was, do you see any other federal or state relief on the horizon for educational purposes? Senator Addabbo, why don't you start with this one?
Sure. As a member of the Senate Education Committee, of course, we always look for whatever assistance and relief we can get. And so I'd like to be optimistic about it, whether it be through our own state budget with the new revenues that, Assemblymember had mentioned. I chair the Race and Gaming and Wagering Committee, so I've been promoting mobile sports betting and, money that we lose to New Jersey because of it, there we don't have it. But whether we do smart, calculated, credible revenue measures, whether it be our budget or a federal stimulus, of course, we're going to look for any kind of assistance we can. We have spots of our state that don't have valid or credible Wi-Fi service, and yet if we're going to mandate that our children are to be home learning remotely, then let's make sure they have the resources and the wherewithal to learn. And and the idea here is we need to address that issue across the board. So, like I said, we have a lot of work to do in education. I'm very concerned about the proposed cuts to education if we don't do the right thing revenue-wise or federal stimulus. Again, the efficiency of that federal stimulus. So, we have, again, a lot of work to do. Again, always prepared to go back this year, but if not this year, certainly, when we start full steam ahead in 2021.
So I agree with the senator. We're at a pretty interesting place. So first, I do believe that the federal government will come through with the $900 billion or close to their stimulus package within the next couple of days as they're required. All signs are finally indicating that the parties are actually in the room negotiating. Remember, this has been going on for months since the first CARES Act came through. Second, I know the Senate has had conference about this, and my assembly colleagues and I have had the same. where we went into a room and started to talk about what are the viability and the potential new revenue streams that we could look at, and the senator named a number of them. And I agree, I'm for mobile sports betting, I'm for legalizing marijuana. I am open to new income taxes, a pied-à-terre tax on somebody's second home. So I'm open to these ideas. Then we did the follow-up discussion of, okay, now you have these new revenue streams. What are our biggest holes that we're going to need to fill? And the senator is right, and this comes back to education. We have made it a priority in the Senate, in the Assembly, in our Democratic conference, and I know the Senate has done the same. We always fight tooth and nail for the two biggest portions of the budget. That's education for our kids, and that's healthcare. They are combined about 80% of our budget, but that's where we're going to look to try to plug in those holes. Now, I have other priorities. Being the chairman of social services, I think there are a lot of vulnerable people who are really impacted by COVID who need our assistance, and we'll have to get to that as well. But I'm confident that some of these new revenue streams will be used, targeted to make up holes in education so we don't shortchange our kids.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
Thank you both. All right, I'm going to now open this up to some of the questions that we are receiving here. So let's go back to the specific legislation. There's some questions more about, in more detail about what it actually does and what it pays for. So the question is, what is the reimbursement based off of? Can it reimburse? Can it be reimbursing other items such as, there's questions about salaries for staff who worked on creating rotations, finding doctors to come down to the schools, and other more general expenses such as polycarbonate shields, temperature scanners, and things of that nature. So I think there's a little bit of, confusion on what it actually reimburses. Yes.
So my understanding, the intention of the bill is not to cover those other ancillary costs at this point. This is about testing.
Right.
And if anybody who's watching or who asked that question wants to have a conversation about the potential next steps, if we want to go after reimbursement for some of those items, I'm open to have that conversation. Again, keeping in the back of your mind that the more you try to add on, the harder it's going to be to get done.
Right.
But the bill as written only goes after testing. But we can have those conversations. I'm certainly open because I know there's much more coming down the pike by way of costs with this. But this was our first opening salvo, and I look forward to talking more about that.
Right. And it's also worth noting that a lot of the federal packages aim to reimburse schools for those other pieces as well. So
and that's one of the few things that I think the federal government will be able to agree on.
Right.
So I think you'll get that money.
Right.
I think, the person who asked that question, it's certainly of a sound basis of which to ask. I mean, that is a perfect question to ask because it's a valid question. These schools should be reimbursed. This is something that, they were mandated to do, and obviously they want to do to ensure the safety, but, they should be reimbursed. So it wouldn't be in this bill. This bill is for the testing itself, but federal stimulus, whatever we can eke out of our state budget, the bottom line is that's a valid question that's, again, asked by many throughout the state. So I look forward to working on that issue.
Yeah, and by the way, Senator, if I could just jump in with one more thought. So we're talking about prospective revenue, right? You're talking about stuff coming from the federal government. You're talking about taxes. I do want to put on the record that Governor Cuomo is sitting on hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars from the original CARES Act, that if you read the regulation says that it's supposed to be spent for PPE and maybe some of the other things that were mentioned in that question could be used. Some of the funds could be used to fund those asks. So the state does have money. It does have money that's earmarked to help, particularly with COVID. From the CARES Act, they created what's called the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which originally had about $7 billion. We've spent some of it down, but there's some left. And there may be opportunities there to try to get existing money that the state has on hand for purposes like that.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that we should explore for sure. We appreciate the thought. There's another more technical question about where the funding will come in and how it will be used. So the question is there an existing allocation to the New York State Education Department that can be leveraged, or will it be an add-on to the budget?
I believe it'll have to be an add-on. I believe it'll have to be an add-on. That's the simple answer.
Yeah, I agree. Again, we can look at federal stimulus, but I think it's an add-on.
Right.
If we were able to do it this year, which again, I'm not optimistic about that, or being realistic, but in a $178 billion budget, we can find some money for this. But the bottom line is probably have to be a new allocation.
Yeah. And my guess, just to piggyback, is the state already provides funds for some of the mandates that we put on our non-public schools, including, we make you take attendance. There are a variety of other things that we already try to reimburse for. The original thought would be, just piggyback off of that funding structure, but then you're taking away money from that reimbursement already. So it'll have to be an add-on.
Right. Okay, now we have some more broad questions. One is, can you just let us know sort of more generally, what are both of your priorities in the next budget season for the state, just more generally?
Senator? Oh, okay.
Yeah. No pressure.
Yeah, all right. Again, a lot of what I do up in Albany is fed off of the concerns and the interest and the feedback I get from my constituents. So listening to their concerns and then going forward something. So, whether it be, and Andy knows about this issue, about putting covers on top of rail cars, because I got constituents in Glendale and Middle Village complaining about, the odor and the debris as the train goes through their district, through their community. But a lot of that, what I do is based on the constituents. I am big about school safety. Again, a member of the Education Committee. In our public schools, the doors are wide open. And I go to the private schools and yeshivas and others, and the doors are locked. You got to get buzzed in. Our public schools, the doors are wide open. You can walk into any public school, and I have a problem with that. I have 2 children in the school system, and, I think school safety is important. So I would say lock the doors of the public schools and let them get buzzed like everyone else. Crossing guards. I mean, anything that has to do with school safety. I'm on the Veterans Committee, so I think the veteran suicide rate is way too high, and it's a number that we can certainly reduce by addressing the issues that our veterans have. So, trying to address the veteran suicide issue. And there is a study actually being done about women in the military and if they're getting the right services. So I'm going to follow up on that study next year as well. So, a lot of what we do, again, aging committee, I'm on the age committee, so working with our seniors. But it is about how it relates to my district and how it relates, residents statewide.
So first, the senator's done some great work on those issues, particularly helping veterans. And yes, that train issue that you mentioned has been with us for quite some time. I look forward to working with you on that. So my priorities for this coming session, I'm the chair of the Social Services Committee, and it's based off of need. So right now, it's not my pleasure to report, but I feel the need to report that the social safety net that we have set up for the most vulnerable New Yorkers is crumbling. It's falling apart because Governor Cuomo has decided to, he doesn't call it a cut, but he's been withholding funds to every nonprofit in the state of New York while requiring them to continue to provide services. And when I'm saying nonprofits and services, I am talking food, the food insecurity for people, right? Before COVID, we had 1.2 million New Yorkers who were food insecure. We're now well over 2. I'm talking about childcare. We've had childcare providers going out of business every week for the last several months. We're talking about children with disabled developmental disabilities. We have not been funding their services. Seniors, I can keep going ad nauseum. Every service that we are supposed to provide is not being provided, and they're all preventative, which means that the things that we're trying to prevent are going to metastasize and get worse. So what we're looking at is you're going to see more people who are going to become homeless. You're going to see more people get involved with the criminal justice system. Let me speak about kids for a minute. For our children, we're going to have to assess the impact for their mental health of having been locked up in their houses for several months. And I will tell you something that I believe in deeply called adverse childhood experiences, which are unfortunately, so adverse childhood experience for kids are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, domestic violence, exposure to some of the worst things in society. And what that does at a young age is it has a consequential effect on the development of a child's young brain that if you don't deal with early on, those kids are going to be exponentially more likely to wind up in the criminal justice system, going to wind up on public assistance in perpetuity, and wind up homeless. And unfortunately, what we found these days is that everything we're nervous about, has been rising. So we see rising rates of child abuse, even though reports for child abuse have been down because kids haven't been in school. We know that domestic violence rates are through the roof. So this COVID lockdown, while it was the right thing for New York State to do, has a lot of consequences. Those consequences are going to manifest in real trouble for the lives of our kids and some of our most vulnerable New Yorkers. And I want to be clear about that. If we don't address it, not only is it going to be more difficult for them, but they're going to require the most expensive services that we're going to, every taxpayer is going to have to foot the bill for. So we're in a really precarious time. So I'll be looking to focus on the most vulnerable New Yorkers in their own sections, like domestic violence or child abuse or the rest, to try to offset some of the damage that have happened during COVID.
Thank you.
Sure.
The one thing I would like to put on your radar, and maybe you could put on your colleagues' radar, is I think for the people in the trenches, one of the big hidden costs for schools is extra staffing needs, because teachers are in quarantine, you're doing hybrid, so you need to cover 2 sets of kids, even though it's really 1 class, let's say. And I think that's really a cost that maybe if you're not dealing with day to day may not be readily apparent, but I think that's really one of the big costs that schools are wrestling with.
That's a good point. You know, as our schools had to adapt with the COVID and do, you know, hybrid learning, remote learning, and increase the staff, that is a great point, you know, and obviously something we could work on. Again, funding being what it is and available funds, but that is a great point because we have to adapt our budget issues and needs based on how the schools had to adapt for COVID.
Yeah, and I agree completely. It's a good point to bring up. I will tell you that you know, some of the frustration that all of us have had over the last couple of months, particularly, you know, representing kids who are going in and parents who are not able to go into the public school system, is the staffing shortages have exacerbated a lot of our problems. I will tell you, and Senator, I was going to reach out to you in the next couple of weeks to talk about this, but it's perfect timing. The staffing shortages are bad enough for every kid in school. They're especially bad for the 200,000 children who have IEPs and developmental disabilities. There is a group of parents who just released a survey, which I'm happy to provide to all of you, that suggests that our kids with IEPs usually go into classrooms with 2 teachers and spend a certain amount of time with those teachers. They've been knocked down to 1 teacher. Sometimes it's for just a few hours while they're doing remote learning. And you're talking about kids who are not going to be able to catch up. For these kids, this is life damage. This is, they're losing time in their efforts to become fully functional members of society. So we're really gonna have to focus on the staffing shortages, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Great. All right, well, I think we're getting close to the end of the call here. And again, I wanted to thank you both for everything that you're doing and for taking the time to address us and this group. We're so very grateful for this piece of legislation that you've introduced, and for everything that you've done for non-public schools and our communities writ large, for, you know, from the beginning of your time in the legislature. I just wanted to open it up one more time to each of you, you know, to give some final thoughts on the topic and anything really that you wanted to say, and then we can wrap this up.
Senator? Oh, we're going alphabetical? Okay. All right. Thank Teach NYS. Thanks again. You know, and one of the great parts of my job is I get to work with good people, people who really care and dedicated to others, like my friend, Assemblymember Andrew Hevesi. It's a great part of my job. Like yourselves, parents who are so, you know, passionate about their child and wanting just what's best for their child. You know, when this issue came out about the COVID test being, the cost of which being borne by the school itself, I got to thank, you know, St. Stanislaus and Maspeth. They were one of the first schools to reach out to me, and the parents were so, you know, vocal about the issue, as were many private schools throughout my district when the closures started to happen with the zones and the COVID spike. You know, that's what makes government work. You know, when we all work together for the benefit, in this case, of our students, our children, you know, that's what makes government best. When we work together, navigating through a pandemic, pooling our resources, working together, being on the same page and going forward in that way. That's what makes the job that I have and the opportunity I've been given and blessed with so gratifying, really, is the fact that I get to work with really good people. So I want to thank you for this opportunity. This is not going to be the first and the last time that we speak or talk, because I got a feeling, you know, we'll have many conversations as we go forward, as we address each issue that every child has, no matter where they sit, no matter what kind of desk they sit in or what kind of mobile device they're on these days, learning remotely. The bottom line is no matter where that child is or what the background is, that child needs the best educational resources and environment that we can give them. That's our obligation. So again, I look forward to working with you all. Hope you all stay safe and hope you all have a great, happy, and healthy holiday season. Thank you again.
Yeah, I shouldn't have let the senator go first. He was much better than I'm going to be. So it's a tough act to follow, but it's a pleasure to work with Joe. He's been a friend for years, and I love serving with him. Here's my parting thought. COVID is terrible. It's been terrible for all of us. Everybody has been impacted in some sort of negative way. It is our job as elected officials to be ready to listen to what the existing problems are and then try to mandate and push policies that are going to offset those problems. That's who we are. That's what we do. So I know in the questions in the chat today, people had some other suggestions. I'd love to talk about those. But if there are other issues that you're dealing with, if there's problems with the local principal, if we think the lockdowns are being done stupidly, which some of them are, we're here to push. Our simple agenda is to make this as easy as possible for our constituents to get through this terrible time. And finally, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, but we'll get out of this. We'll get out of this stronger. But in the meantime, the senator and I are here. We are listening, and we will sit with anybody who wants to sit with us and try to take your ideas, because I guarantee if it's happening in our districts, it's happening elsewhere throughout the state. We'll build coalitions and we'll go after the issues that we need to go after to make sure that this is not the most unbearable time that anybody's had to experience. And this issue jumped out at us just by virtue of our constituents having contact with us. It was Our Lady Queen of Martyrs who we talked to the principal and the staff there, and they were like, listen, this is a big problem. What do you think? And we came up with this bill. So that's just an example of what we're here to do. And I just want to offer that as an opportunity to anybody who's listening during this difficult time and after. And then I just would wish everybody be smart, be safe. We're almost through this. We'll get through it together. And if you need help, just reach out. But happy holidays to everybody. And I hope your families stay well and safe. And thank you again to Teach New York and Eli and Daniel for putting this together. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Just on a personal note, as a Queens native myself, I just wanted to thank you both for everything that you do. And I wanted to say on the record that Teach NYS, openly supports this piece of legislation, and we will be doing everything that we can to help to assure that this bill passes. So thank you again. And thank you, everyone. Happy Hanukkah, Chag Sameach, happy holidays to you both. And we will be in touch shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.